You have the pleasure of listening to my voice today. I'll try and keep it fairly interesting and fairly upbeat because I appreciate it's going to be listening to me for a little while on the data points. And whilst the data is really interesting, I'm going to try and keep my voice nice and lively because we are in that post-lunch session, and we all know what that's like in the afternoon after a bit of a snack. So we're going to be focusing today on staff retention in academies. So I recently worked with the team on publishing the most recent report that we've got, which this session is all based on data from that report. And we'll be looking at understanding the sector challenges relating to retention specifically. Me and Iona will be, as Iona just said, will be the two people discussing this today within this session and kind of going through some of the data and the insights that we found when writing the report and sharing some of those more interesting data points with you. A little bit about our data sets. So since our survey launched in 2018-2019 academic year, we've had between 10,000 and 40,000 staff members per year completing the survey. So now that's a data set which consists of around 180,000 staff responses collected from between September 2018 and the most recent data set up until March 2024. So we'll be looking at, when we're talking about data from the 2023-2024 academic year, we're talking about data from September through to March this year. I thought it was important to take a quick look at this. This is really fresh data that was released by the DFE last week, and that's looking at the national picture of the DFE data. So looking at the staff workforce census data. And what we can see is that actually there's been an increase in the number of full-time teachers, and there's been an increase in the number of teaching assistants in positions, up 300 teachers roughly since the last year's data, and around 1,800 teaching assistants. We've seen an increase in the number of those, and it's an increase of 61,000 teaching assistants since 2011, since the census began collecting that data. The number of teachers entering and leaving the service both fell through the number of entrants continues to be higher than ever before, and it continues to be higher than leavers. Teacher vacancies have also increased by around 20% in November 2023 from 2,300 in November 2024. So we're seeing an increase in the number of vacancies. There's also an increase in the temporary filled posts from around 2,100 to around 3,700 over the 3 years. So if we consider this national picture and the context that we're going to be looking at the data in, it's important to consider that the teacher vacancies have increased. There are more teachers than there has been in the profession since the census began. So what have we learned about staff retention academies from doing these surveys over the last 5 years? We're going to be looking specifically at the data in this bit. We're going to look at some of it that's trends over time and some of it that is specific to this academic year, so our most recent data set. We're going to start off by taking a look at some of the data and the staff retention by staff characteristics. So if we look at the overall percentage of staff considering resigning, around 44% of staff are now reporting considering resigning constantly, often, or sometimes. If we look at that as a trend over the last 6 data points we have, we can see that in 2018-2019, it started off with around 39% of staff reporting considering resigning constantly, often, or sometimes in our survey. We saw that slightly improve during the pandemic, with the percentage dropping down to 34% in 2020-2021, and then increasing steadily over the last 3 years up to now a high within our survey of around 44% of staff considering resigning constantly, often, or sometimes. Breaking that down by role, we can see a notable change. The teaching assistants are 3% more likely so far this academic year to be considered resigning constantly, often, or sometimes compared to 2022-2023, which is the largest increase compared to any other roles this academic year, because as you can see from some of those teaching assistants and other roles, they had an increase in the percentage of staff in those roles considering resigning, whereas the others either remained the same or had a slight improvement in terms of the percentage of staff considering resigning from those roles. You can see from the data it follows a very similar trend for most roles. Across the national data, apart from senior leaders, who over the last 3 years we've seen their risk of resignation improving from around 31% of senior leaders considering resigning to around 28% of senior leaders now considering resigning from their roles, sometimes constantly, or constantly, often, or sometimes. So whilst we consider how often staff are considering resigning, it's also important to consider if those staff were to consider resign, if those staff are considering resigning, if they resigned, would they remain or leave in the profession? If we look at this breakdown by the same roles as that we've just seen, across the risk of resignation, we see the teachers, senior leaders, middle leaders are more likely to remain in the profession if they were to resign from their post, whereas teaching assistants, administrative staff, and other staff are more likely to leave the profession. Teaching assistants and administrative staff were the most likely to report that they would leave the profession if they were to resign in those. We'll take a look slightly later in this session at some of the reasons specific to roles are leaving, considering resigning from their positions. What we're going to do in this section here is we're just going to have a look at some of the breakdowns of different demographic details or protected characteristics, and we're going to be having a look at how often they were considering resigning from their post. And on this slide, for example, we're going to be looking at by age, and you can see earlier in this session today we were talking about Iona. 25 to 34 were highlighted, and again within the data here we can see that when we asked teachers or staff within schools of the age of 25 to 34 in the past 3 months, how often have you considered resigning for your post? 47% of this group have thought about it at least some of the time, so sometimes, often, constantly. And we can see as staff generally get older within their roles, we can see that the percentage of staff considering resigning improves as the age gets higher. Looking at it by disability, there's a little note there on the screen as you can see at the bottom. It's worth noting that the majority of disabled respondents in our data set have an invisible disability rather than a visible disability. But disabled staff within our data are significantly more likely to have considered resigning. 54% have considered it at least some of the time, so compared to 43% of those without a disability. So as you can see from that, it's important to note as well that our sample sizes are fairly small for this question, but we felt it was important to highlight the differences of experience still, by sharing this data with the sector. So whilst we've had a look now at some of the staff characteristics, and there are plenty more to delve into in the report itself. We've just highlighted a couple for today, but there are more that you can delve into in the report if you wish to look into some of those in a bit more detail at some of the different staff characteristics and how that experience differs for retention. We're going to now have a look at some of the different school characteristics and how experience differs by some of those different school characteristics. whilst we're saying we're going to have a look at it by school characteristics, it's important to also point out here's a nice graph that's got all of the data points of respondents to this question by school. So you can see that no experience of retention is the same from school to school. The number of staff considering resigning rarely or never ranges from about 8% of staff considering resigning rarely or never to 100% of staff another. So it very much is the case that it's important to listen to staff and to find out from staff their experiences, because as you can see, there's no one response to this, and it's not consistent across all of them. You can see there's a big variety in the range of responses to this question. If we take a look at staff risk of resignation by phase, we see that around 46% of secondary school staff have considered resigning at least sometimes. So that's sometimes, often, and constantly, compared to 41% of those at primary schools. So we can see that all through as well there are the most likely to staff at all through schools are most likely to consider resigning constantly, often, or sometimes. Well, that is a much smaller sample size within our data, but you can see there's a clear difference between the experience of staff in primary and secondary schools as well. Looking at the difference by Ofsted rating, this is one that when doing the reports we kind of had a look into, and there's quite a bit of discussion around this when we were looking at what to include within the report, because there were so many parameters and data points that we could have included. This is one we felt was one that we should include to kind of look at in a bit more detail and to get some of the feedback from the sector on, with 44% of those both good and outstanding schools having considered resigning at least sometimes, compared to 49% of those requires improvement schools. So we're seeing that the staff at schools that with a requires improvement Ofsted rating are more likely to consider resigning constantly, often, or sometimes, compared to those at outstanding or good schools. We do see that staff at inadequate schools were the most likely to consider resigning constantly, often, or sometimes. But again, that sample size is much smaller than the other three within our data set for this question. So comparing results by trust size. So we took our data and kind of had a look at how often staff have considered resigning from their post, depending on the size of the trust that they work in. So we can see that there's really limited differences between size of trust and their likelihood to consider resigning from their post. So there is no real relationship that is visible within these data, and there's no significant differences between the groups in how often staff are considered resigning and the size of their trust in those. But it's one that we thought is important to consider, considering some of the narratives around staff retention and trust sizes in the sector at the moment. So what matters most when it comes to retention in academies? We're going to do a poll now, which I would love some for you to engage in. And it's, which of these do you think is the main reason staff are considering resigning? And this is one of the questions we ask in our staff experience and wellbeing survey. There are more answers to this, but I've asked out of these ones that we've popped here, which of these do you feel is the main reason staff are considering resigning? Yes. Not sure what to expect with the results for it just yet. So it'll pop when they pop up. We'll see. Do you know if you get them straight away, or do they pop up
I
afterwards?
think it should, if the poll's closed, I think it should pop up shortly afterwards.
Cool. So this is fairly new technology for me. I've got no idea. Should pop up.
I think there might be an issue with the poll. Sorry, I'm just waiting for Dilky to confirm. Just bear with us, sorry. Oh no, it's here. Just bear with us. No, I can't see.
Does anyone want to pop in the chat what they thought theirs was, maybe, while we're waiting? Anybody have any reflections on some of the reasons that were there?
Ben, why don't you tell us the answer, and then when the if the poll shows its face, then we can see how we got on against the
Yeah, we can see.
reality.
Let me click onto this. Here we go. So we in our survey we ask staff for what has made you consider resigning, and it's a multiple choice question that we ask for this. Can you see the pop-up on the screen that's got for me? No. Oh, it's
I
gone
just
for
saw
me
it
as well.
and then it went away.
It was there and it's just
it's here now.
disappeared. It's here.
Yeah.
So you can see from the group here, we can see overwhelming workload resoundingly, with 52% of us on the call today saying that overwhelming workload was the top reason for that we thought was staff were considering resigning, followed by feeling underwhelmed, and we can see there from the actual answers to the survey that we have we've asked over the academic year this year. We can see that overwhelming workload was the top reason, with 41% of staff who'd responded to the survey claiming that overwhelming workload was the reason they consider resigning. So this question is asked to those members of staff who have said that they consider resigning, sometimes constantly or often, in the survey, and we can see that overwhelming workloads up there: feeling undervalued, low staff morale in the workplace, lack of staffing, pupil behaviour are the top 5 reasons why staff are considering resigning from their roles in response to this question. If we take that question and we then break it down by role. So I think, Gemma, you just commented in the chat saying you think it's slightly different for teaching and support staff. What we can see here, okay, is a breakdown of the reasons for staff considering resigning by those different roles that we looked at earlier on. So we can actually see that staff in classroom-based roles are more likely to have reasons such as like pupil behaviour in the top 5 reasons for considering resigning. One that is apparent throughout all of the different roles is feeling undervalued. So feeling undervalued appears for all roles that we looked at here, and you can see that feeling undervalued is a common theme for each of those roles, as is overwhelming workload. Particularly for teachers and senior leaders, overwhelming workload appears at the top of the top 5 reasons for considering resigning. For roles such as teaching assistants and other roles, we see financial reasons popping up in there, lack of staffing popping up in there, and low staff morale in the workplace as well, coming up as one of the reasons why they've suggested that may have considered resigning from their roles. So there's some really interesting findings to have a look into here. If you want to look at it in a bit more detail in the report, this is in the report, and it goes into this on there if you want to take it away and have a look at those in relation to your schools and your settings. So what we also do in the the report is we have a look at what correlates strongest with staff risk of resignation. So what we've just seen there is the answers to a specific question that we've asked members of staff is what they're saying are the reasons they are considering resigning. Whereas what we're going to have a look at now is what correlates strongest with the risk of resignation. So looking at the responses to other questions within the survey and how strong that correlates with their likelihood to have considered resigning, sometimes, often, or constantly. These are the top three areas within the survey that we have that pop up as correlating strongest with staff risk of resignation. We see health and emotional well-being mattering to staff, leadership dynamics, and workload. If you were in the session slightly earlier on, you might have heard them. I think it was in your session, Iona, first session today, that Sophia and those on the call were discussing the fact that communication also appeared in our previous report. So it was leadership dynamics, workload, and communication previously that popped up as the three things that correlates strongest with risk of resignation. This year, we included a new module in our survey, which was the health and emotional wellbeing module, and that has come up as one of the strongest correlating modules with risk of resignation. So if we see here, for example, we can see this is one of the questions that we have from our health and emotional wellbeing module, which is overall, how well have you felt lately, physically and mentally? 88% of staff at high risk of resignation, so that's considering resigning sometimes, often, or constantly, don't feel well at all, so feel not well at all, compared to 12% of those of staff who don't feel well, who are at low risk. We'll see 11% of staff who feel very well are at high risk of resignation. So there's a clear correlation between how well staff are feeling physically and mentally and a risk of resignation. Looking at how stressed staff feel, so we asked staff how often have they felt stressed lately. You can see that 79% of staff at high risk of resignation feel stressed very often, compared to only 10% of staff who are at high risk of resignation feeling stressed never. So there is again a clear correlation between how stressed staff feel and their risk of resignation. Looking at our other module now, there are other questions. Important to note, there are other questions within these modules. I've just selected a couple for the sake of the presentation today on these for the webinar. If you want to have a look at the rest of the questions within these modules, they are included in the report, and you can look at those in more detail in there. Now looking at the leadership dynamics module, we see that one of the questions that we ask is, how appreciated by leadership do you feel for your work? So if we think back to the questions that we saw previously when we asked staff what's made them considered resigning, we see feeling undervalued and elements of that shown through in those responses. Here we're looking at how appreciated by the leadership do they feel for their work, and we can see that there's a correlation between how appreciated staff feel for their work by leadership and their risk of resignation, with 86% of staff at high risk of resignation feeling not appreciated at all, and 16% of staff who said they felt completely appreciated at high risk of resignation, showing that there's a clear trend between how appreciated staff feel for their work and those with a medium correlation for that question. For the question, how confident are you that leadership actively work to address your professional needs? Again, there is a correlation there visible of minus 0.46, which is a medium correlation for those who are interested in the statistics. We can see that 84% of staff who reported feeling not confident at all were at high risk of resignation. And only 15% of staff who felt completely confident that leadership actively worked to address were at high risk of resignation. Again, showing a clear correlation between how confident they were that leadership were addressing their professional needs and how likely they were to consider resigning, sometimes constantly or often. One that moving on to the workload module that we have here, we can see that the responses to this question, which was how often do you feel overworked? So this is one of the questions that we ask in our workload module, and we're looking at this by risk of resignation, again, similar to the previous ones. You can see that 73% of staff who feel overworked very often are likely to consider resigning, sometimes, often, or constantly, whereas only 14% of staff who feel overworked never were likely to consider resigning, sometimes, constantly, or often, showing that those staff who are more likely to feel overworked are more likely to consider resigning, which might not come as a surprise to any of us on this call, because we, as you've all pointed out, overwhelming workload seems to appear as some of the reasons that we all think staff are considering resigning within the sector. But this is just to show that actually there is a correlation between how overworked staff feel and their likelihood to consider resigning as well. The question that we had some discussion on in the first session, the first webinar today. So if you weren't there for the first webinar and you want to have a quick look over that, there was some discussion about how you feel, how excited you feel about the work you're doing, and your likelihood to resign, and your well-being. So here we're looking at how often do you feel excited by the work that you do, and we can see quite clearly there that 90% of staff that never feel excited by the work they do are considering resigning, sometimes, constantly, or often, whereas only 16% of staff who feel excited very often are considering resigning, sometimes, constantly, or often. So there is a clear correlation there between how excited staff feel for their work and their likelihood to consider resigning from their role, and how often they consider resigning. How easy or difficult is it to stay on top of your work responsibilities? There is a slightly smaller correlation, that's a new word, a correlation or relationship between how easy or difficult it is to stay on top of their work responsibilities and their likelihood to resign. But what it's a slightly lower correlation of -3.4. But that you can see there is a slight relationship in how easy or difficult staff find it to stay on top of their work responsibilities and their likelihood to consider resigning. So these are areas that we see as having correlations or areas of impact that can have impact on staff retention, which I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Iona. I will stop sharing, so Iona, you can share now for your section, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think this first half of the session that Ben's just taken us through, I think is really, really valuable for highlighting the context and highlighting the challenge, and then sort of starting to think about where are the areas where we can have the highest impact to kind of tackle those reasons why people are considering resigning. And I think, as everyone has highlighted, workload is one of those really big problems. And what I think is really interesting is in that last slide that Ben just showed, which is how easy or difficult it is to stay on top of your work responsibilities. The fact that we see a smaller relationship between that and retention, and how often they feel overworked, I think does speak a little bit to that sense of purpose that has kind of come up on again and again throughout the morning, and that feeling that if you're spending a lot of time on things that sort of give you energy and give you purpose, it might feel less draining and less kind of it might feel less like you're being overworked than if you are spending time on things that are kind of less exciting to you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that, as the day's kind of gone on, we've come back to kind of again and again, and I think that's both reassuring and concerning. I think the concerning side of it is sort of saying, like, it's very, very clear that there are some specific problems and some specific challenges that the sector is facing, but then the kind of reassuring side of that is actually we can focus our attention on these particular challenges, and hopefully getting these a bit moving these along a little bit is hopefully going to have a kind of disproportionate impact if we see that these are the things with the biggest relationship, and improvement in these areas should have the biggest impact on overall retention figures.
Yeah, just want to get out.
I'm just going to request anyone who is on the line and not intending to speak to the group to put yourselves on mute so that we don't accidentally overhear anything that you don't want us to overhear. Okay, so yeah, we've just now gone through a discussion of the kind of reasons why people might be considering resigning and how we can think about tackling those challenges. And what I'm going to do is try and flip that conversation on its head and try and start thinking about how can we enhance the reasons that people might stay. So if I share my screen now, you should hopefully see my provocatively entitled "Why would anyone want to work here?" And I think that yeah, this is something that if we know that retention is a challenge, and the challenge now we can see has persisted. We had an improvement in the situation in COVID, but it has remained a reasonably high challenge over the last number of years. And with vacancies at a high, this challenge is not going away and is perhaps likely to get even more significant. So what I'm going to attempt to do over the next sort of few minutes is go through some of the data that Ben's already shared and highlight some what I think is glimmers of hope in our data that can help us answer this question: why would anyone want to work here, kind of proudly and confidently, and with evidence sitting behind that. So I've mentioned already, but please do share in the chat as we go through if there is anything that you can think of that you believe is the reason why people would want to work in the education sector, anything that you think is of kind of real importance to people who are coming in, as you're hiring people in, as you're training new teachers. What are the reasons why people are coming here in the first place? And I'm going to talk over that as we go through with some additional data. So first of all, this slide might be familiar to you from about 10 minutes ago. Ben highlighted the kind of main reasons why those who are considering resigning are considering resigning. And there's a few things that I want to draw people's attention to. And the first one is this one down here. So of those who are considering resigning, only 2% of people said that they are considering resigning because the profession is wrong for them. And I think we've spoken on and off all day about this kind of the purpose and why the level of purpose and the level of passion that people feel for the profession can be a real driver of kind of well-being, of strong leadership. It's also, it seems, a strong driver of retention. And I think that if this number was much higher, we might be having quite a different conversation now, because if everyone is of the opinion that the sector is not the right one for them, then we might not be able to solve this problem. But because there is such a small proportion of people that believe that the profession is wrong for them, what that's telling us is there is a large proportion of people that believe the profession is potentially right for them, but there are other challenges there that need to be focused on. And a couple of data points that I'll share to kind of back that up. Ben showed earlier the correlation between staff feeling excited by the work that they do and resignation. And I think this is really interesting. This is the overall data. So rather than looking at the relationship, this is just the answers to that question: how often do you feel excited by the work that you do? And 57% of staff often feel excited, and 91% of staff feel excited at least some of the time. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that that's something that we should consider and look to kind of find additional ways to drive that excitement and drive that kind of passion and reasons to come to work. The next topic that I want to highlight is around dissatisfaction with people's line managers. This was given as a reason for considering resigning by only 10% of staff who are considering resigning. And I think in our data, we can see some really quite positive data relating to line management relationships. So we can see that 71% of staff feel that their line manager take their professional needs into account. And we can see that 72% of staff feel that their line manager take their personal needs into account. We've released another report a while ago called Improving School Trusts, where we look in a bit more detail at the line management relationship in particular. And I think this is speaking to a really nice and supportive relationship, particularly at that kind of first level relationship between you and the person immediately above you. I'll move on from that one straight to dissatisfaction with the SLT. So a slightly larger proportion of people, 19% of those who are considering resigning, mentioned SLT as a reason why they are doing so. And we do see in our wider research and in that report I've just mentioned, Improving School Trust, we do see there is a disconnect between when it comes to leadership dynamics. And Ben's just presented this data showing that leadership dynamics is one of the key, one of the strongest relationships with retention. So what I'm doing here is not saying we don't need to worry about leadership. I think it's clear that we do need to consider how we are interacting as leaders with those across the organisation. When it comes to wellbeing, when it comes to retention, these things are really, really important. But there are still areas where leadership are doing things well. And this data point here, 71% of staff feel that leadership treat them fairly. That still means that 29% are less convinced. But there are kind of good relationships and good things going on at the leadership level as well. And if we can look for those and we can find kind of ways to strengthen that, I think we might be able to enhance that sort of limit that challenge on the kind of resignation side, and also enhance that on the kind of reasons to stay side. And then this one is one that I want to draw attention to as well. This is not worth pretending. It is not worth sort of trying to explain away in any way, shape or form. A third of staff who have considered resigning at least some of the time have done so because of low staff morale in the workplace. And I think that's kind of clearly a significant problem. But even with that backdrop, there are some kind of positive signs here. And I want to show two stats here, which are 85% of staff feel respected by colleagues and 90% of staff feel comfortable asking colleagues for help. And as I've just gone through, I've talked about line management, I've talked about SLT, and now I'm talking about kind of peer-to-peer relationships. And I think in this particular area, you can see that even when things are challenging, it does seem that there is a really, really supportive network of peers within the organisation, and that people can sort of reach out for help, and they can feel that they are going to be well looked after by those around them. I want to just draw attention to a few other things. So those, as I said, we're thinking about tackling the reasons to consider resigning. We're thinking about reasons why people might stay. And there's a few other areas where I think it's been quite illuminating to look at. And I think the poor work-life balance thing is we need to think about this in more detail. The ideas of kind of workload reduction. I think work-life balance is heavily tied in with workload reduction, which Ben has spoken about already, but there's also kind of flexible working and ideas around how we can think more creatively about how to kind of enable people to get a bit of a better work-life balance. There's examples in the sector, right, like the 9-day fortnight, which has been launched in certain areas, and other things around kind of where you can do your PPA or when you can do your inset days, and sort of spreading that out across the year in a way that works better for people. Different ways of considering kind of how can we be creative about tackling these challenges that at first glance feel really, really complicated in a sector where face-to-face learning is so core to the sector. Another thing is around lack of career progression opportunities, and I think it's an interesting challenge, and I think it is an interesting idea now. We've spent a few years transitioning from kind of local authorities and schools and headship being pretty much the one among the highest levels that you can reach within the school. Now we're moving, and more schools are members of trusts. The kind of the top is changing, and the career progression opportunities are bigger perhaps than they were previously, but they're also changing quite a lot. So I think there's something to be done around ensuring that people are clear on what their career progression opportunities are, around looking for creative ways of offering those things. I was at an event yesterday and people were talking about secondments between different schools within the trust. So even if there wasn't a role directly ready for that person within that school, was there something else where they could go and share ideas and they could learn from each other and sort of champion their area of work, even if it wasn't a promotion immediately, go somewhere else and start to kind of train others and start to kind of have some sense of development even outside of a kind of more traditional route up the organisation. And financial reasons, I think, is really an interesting thing to say, because I just wanted to draw attention to it because I don't think we have mentioned it yet during the session. Ben might have mentioned it when he was showing the differences by roles, but I can't remember if he did. But it's not that high up the list of reasons for resigning, and I think there's a lot of talk in the press about it being an underpaid sector, and I think this isn't to say that it's not underpaid. It isn't to say that people don't want more money or don't need more money. It isn't to say that everyone who's working in education has got it easy, and we particularly see that with those in administrative roles and teaching assistants in particular. But I think that there can be some sort of over-focus on financial initiatives as a solution. Looking at the manifestos coming out at the moment, financial incentives for joining the profession, for staying in the profession beyond the early career is sort of, it's quite front and center in a number of the manifestos, but actually there are other things that are much higher up the list of reasons for leaving that might be worth spending more time focusing on. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about one of our other initiatives that we've worked on a couple of years ago here at Edurio, which is thinking about reasons for joining. So if we've got people leaving, if we've got 44% of staff considering resigning at least some of the time, if we can see in the workforce census that I think there was a stat that said 9 in 10 teachers remain in the profession after the first year. That is worded like that's a good thing, but it's actually saying that 1 in 10 teachers leave the profession after the first year, which, when you've been doing a multi-year degree to qualify as a teacher, leaving within a year is probably not something that we should be particularly excited by. But all of this is to say that there is clearly going to be an ongoing challenge with staffing within the sector. There is clearly going to be staff resigning, staff vacancies that we're unable to fill. And this is just another area where we have worked over the past couple of years to consider how you can enhance your recruitment outcomes, and then also hopefully enhance your retention outcomes by really, really focusing on your organization's culture, and attempting to get people in at the beginning who are the right, who are set up for success within your organization. And this document here, Culture-Driven Recruitment, which we can share as part of the follow-ups, it takes a look across the recruitment process, from before you've even put out a job ad, and you're just thinking about your reputation within the sector, within the community, within the kind of nearby area. What is the message that you are sending to people about who you are as an organization? Once you then move to the job description, are you saying things like these are the tasks that you will be performing, or are you including things about what it's like to really work in your organization, and what are the types of people who really thrive within your organization? What are the behaviors that are expected from a member of the organization? Moving on through to looking at the job interviews and seeing that as an opportunity for you to kind of show off who you are and be clear and transparent about who you are as an organization, so that the people that you're interviewing have the opportunity to say, actually, sounds like a great job, sounds like the job description and the tasks that would be there for me are ones that I could do, but I'm not really the sort of person that wants this kind of day-to-day culture I'm not going to get on there and you're not going to get on with me, and vice versa. The organization can then say, actually, whilst the kind of key experience boxes are ticked, we know that this is the sort of person who really thrives in our organization, so we're going to hire this person because we think they've got more potential to really, really hit the ground running within our organization. And then seeing that through to onboarding and going forwards as that person joins the organization and they become part of your employer branding. What are they then saying about you as they go out into the wild? How are they kind of representing the organization? How are they living your cultural values, and how are they making that kind of how are they spreading that out, and how are they then becoming another element that can attract people into the organization? So I hope that was a helpful kind of run through. What I've tried to do there is just talk through not just the kind of what are the reasons people are leaving, how do we tackle the reasons people are leaving, but start to think about what are the really good things that are going on within the sector, what are the really exciting things that we can say about the organisation and about the sector more broadly, to try and plug that gap a little bit where vacancies are growing and retention is staying at a reasonably high level. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to pass back to Ben to wrap up the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for cheering up the end of the session a bit from some of the more saddening statistics that I shared around the percentage of staff considering leaving the profession and considering resigning, and helping to shed light on some of the positives that can be seen within those if we consider why is it worth working in education. One of the ones you've highlighted there is about how we can feel, how staff feel respected by their colleagues and how they feel able to ask for support from their colleagues. And one of the things that Leora kindly commented within the conclusions of the report was that it's our responsibility as members of staff within these communities to put our arms around and reach our arms around the members of our school communities who aren't feeling so happy, or are feeling overworked, feeling overwhelmed, feeling undervalued, and it's our responsibilities as members of the school communities to support those that are going through those challenging times. She highlights within the CST's work that they're doing quite a lot of work to help support leaders in shaping trust culture and how they can meet the expectations of staff and improve on those working conditions within schools and trusts. And she talks a lot about de-implementation and doing it more and more to support what is not viable or desirable within this sector, and how we can move the sector forward in supporting staff to feel supported by colleagues and by trust teams and leadership teams. I highlighted one of the quotes from Leora's conclusions from us, which is, when our people flourish, our pupils flourish, and so will our society. And I thought it was a really nice way to tie up the session today that we've had here on staff retention. And what I will do is finish up on a slide that talks about some of our final thoughts from the session today. So the retention crisis isn't going away. As you've seen from some of the data within the reports today, it's still very much an issue that is central to some of the challenges that are faced by schools and trusts. And we need to think about how to fix the systematic problems such as workload, leadership, well-being within schools, so we can support staff in feeling better within their work environments and supporting that to improve staff retention. We need to find ways to promote the sector as a positive choice for people's careers, and hopefully some of those points that we've shared with you and Iona's gone through today during her section of the talk that we've done, we can share some of those reasons to celebrate why the sector is a positive choice for people's careers in education. Yeah, if you haven't already downloaded the report, this is a plug. I'm not going to be too ashamed of saying this is a plug for the report. Please do download the Staff Retention and Academies report. We've covered some of the key insights within this, but there's so much more to delve into within the report itself, and some of those other questions that you may want to have a look into, or the staff characteristics. It's a great way of comparing your own school settings, trust settings with the national data that we've shared within the report. So please head to the website and download that when you get the chance.
We've got a few minutes left before the next session is due to start, although I do see both speakers are in the discussion. Does anyone have any questions or any comments on the retention data? Feel free either to drop it in the chat or to unmute and share your thoughts.
We've done a good job of explaining that, everybody.
Hi, just two thoughts, and I don't know if these are kind of broader burning questions in my own mind. So I've just come out of sector and into education. So I guess I'm curious around how this data compares to industry or to other industries. I'm not sure if you've got that data set. And then more broadly, is there any themes in terms of time of retention? So is there any, with the different kind of dates and gates throughout the year and the cycle? Because what I'm used to out of sector is kind of quarterly surveys of this nature. So I just wondered, with your interim reports, whether you see any trends of different times.
So on your first question about comparing this data to elsewhere in the sector, elsewhere in other sectors, we don't have anything that it kind of is a perfect like-for-like comparison set. One thing that I think is worth considering, and across the course of today, we've talked about data relating to wellbeing, we've talked about data relating to leadership, and we've talked about data relating to retention, and within that, other topics that are related to those topics. I think one area where we do have a reasonable comparison is looking at wellbeing, and we don't have anything that takes specifically our questions and looks at those specific things in other sectors, but there are studies around. There's one by he's called Francis. I'll have to find the study itself, but it's from a researcher at UCL that looked across different professions and found that when it comes to wellbeing, the education sector is pretty rough. The wellbeing scores within education are in a worse state than many other sectors. I'm not going to say more detail than that because I don't want to say anything wrong, but I will get the research together and we can share it as part of the follow-up stuff. The other question that you asked was around the time of year. So at the moment we've done this in the kind of mid-year point. So I think this data is from up until the end of March, Ben.
September and through to the end of March, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a half-year data set. We are going to release another. We'll do the full year analysis over the summer, and what we can do then is we can have a look at the kind of autumn term, spring term, and summer term. It's worth noting that this will be affected somewhat by when people have taken the survey, because people can opt in to take the survey at any point throughout the year. So we'll have to look at it and perhaps caveat the data with some additional kind of context, but it is something that we can look at when we have the full year data set. I hope that was helpful. I'll find the study and I'll pop it in the chat after this. See a note from Hannah, interested in linking up with others on how they plan to introduce flexible working or condensed working. I think this is great. I think I would love one outcome from today to be that we've connected people to get together and brainstorm around these things. So anyone who is already keen to get involved, please feel free to respond to Hannah immediately. But we can also put out a request in the follow-up tomorrow to everybody that's been involved today and ask people to let us know if they'd like to be involved, and then we can arrange for a follow-up discussion. I'm actually keen. There's the specific ask here around flexible working. I would love us to go and get together and start talking about what are those reasons to stay in the sector and what are those kind of really exciting features of the education sector that can act as a kind of draw beyond the kind of fixing those problems about why people are considering resigning. Getting to the end of the hour now, so I think we can hand over. Victoria, I think you are unmuted, and I don't think you are intending to be. There we go. Cool. So we've hit the 2 o'clock mark. I think we can pass over to the final session now. Ernest and Mandy, over to you.